A lot of women are coming in, they just almost look like they don't know what's going on. They're very quiet. They might be very timid. They might be not very eager to speak up because they don't know what's going to happen if they do speak up, even if it's with a team that they trust. That's another big piece too, is developing that trust with the patients right from the get-go. When they come in, we have to provide an environment that feels safe for them. I know that my team does a really good job of that.
Welcome to Beyond Theory, a podcast powered by Meadows Behavioral Healthcare that brings you in-depth conversations with firsthand insights from the front lines of mental health and addiction recovery. I'm Dominic Lawson. 1 in 4 women have experienced physical violence by an intimate partner during their lifetime, according to the National Intimate Partner Sexual Violence Survey. In this special 2-part episode for Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we speak with Willow House Clinical Director Havi Kang, as she shares how domestic violence not only includes violence, but unfortunately, so much more. Let's get out of the abstract and see how this applies in the real world. It's time to go beyond theory.
I'm Havi Kang, Clinical Director at the Willow House at the Meadows.
All right. Javi, thank you so much for coming on the Beyond Theory podcast.
Yeah.
Awesome. So if you would, just kind of share your background.
Sure. Originally I'm from England. I was born and raised there. I moved to the U.S. in 2000, which was interesting. It was a culture shock for sure from coming from England to America. And this was right before 9/11 had occurred as well. And so that was an interesting experience coming to a new country and just experiencing a lot of trauma myself around that. And so it was quite the experience. I've been here for a long time now. I've been here in Arizona the whole time and spent, initially I did not like it here. I just didn't. But I've grown to love Arizona very much. And so, just kind of going through my own stuff, I wanted to go to school. I wanted to, and culturally too, in my culture, I'm Indian, from India. Having an education is really, really like highly valued. And so I knew I wanted to do some work with people. I didn't know in what capacity, but I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And it kind of I took a few things here and there. I took a lot of different classes in college to kind of narrow down what I wanted to do. But psychology seemed to be the one that was calling out to me a lot. And I just was really good at it. I'm not good with numbers. Not sciencey at all. Simple arithmetics is just not good for me. It makes me anxious. So, but I know how to talk to people. I do that really well, and I love to support people. And, I did my undergraduate in psychology and sociology, and then I did my graduate degree in mental health and clinical counseling. I did an internship at an eating disorder facility to begin with. During that time, I was also doing a yoga teacher training program. That's also another passion of mine. I've been doing yoga since college. And I think that is really what set me on this journey to begin with. Really getting in touch with spirituality and just myself, my own emotions and my body, and how I was not listening to myself and listening to my body and my emotions and the traumas that I had been through. And so that was quite the experience to go through. It was an 8-month teacher training program. And that really just opened up a lot of doors for me in being able to support other people too. So I was doing that simultaneously, doing my internship and doing this eating disorder facility as well. And I was helping set up their IOP, their intensive outpatient program, but it was such a small place and there wasn't very many clients. And as a new therapist, I was hungry. I was hungry for to help, but there wasn't anyone in the program. Well, there was only one patient in the program, and it was great. I was able to really help her, but I wanted more. And so, the Meadows had been a place that I had known since grad school. I went to, undergrad, because I was here at NAU, Northern Arizona University. And so I knew about the Meadows from a long time ago. I just always felt like maybe I wasn't good enough. I wasn't like strong enough of a clinician just yet. And luckily I'd known some people in the field at that point who had encouraged me to apply. And so I began at the Meadows at the Claudia Black Young Adult Center. I love it there. I loved it there. I still do. I was a primary therapist there for 3 years, I want to say. And then I transitioned from that into the trauma therapist, and I got some more training, trauma training. I got EMDR trained. I'm still in the middle of somatic experiencing training. The Meadows model, the PIT model, I was trained in that. And we have such a good like trauma services department. And so getting support from everyone that's in that department was really crucial during that time for me. And I think it really like deepened my clinical skills during that time, during being a trauma therapist. I never really wanted to be a clinical director, if I'm completely honest.
Okay.
But it was just something that I felt like people had told me like, Javi, you'd be a great like director, a clinical director. I'm like, no, like that's just not, I want to work with patients. I want to be like, doing that face-to-face stuff. And I don't know, I just felt like it was an opportunity that I couldn't miss. And I've actually loved it so far. So I've been at Willow House since November 2020. So just shy of a year, but I'm pretty settled in now, and I really enjoy working with the women there. And they're very acute women, very coming in with a lot of significant trauma, sexual trauma specifically, but relationship trauma, there's domestic violence, there's sexual abuse, depression, anxiety, PTSD, the typical stuff. We do get a lot of, personality disorders, specifically borderline personality disorder is one that we see frequently. But I've loved it so far.
I hear that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I hear early on in this conversation from you, Javi, is that, training and getting better is important to you, right? It's probably why you're the clinical director at Willow House now. But I think it's also important for inspiring clinicians to hear that. Was that something that you sought out? Did you seek out more training? Was it just kind of like this is something I must do? Kind of talk me through that professional development part of your career, if you would.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a clinical supervisor now, and like that's a big piece of what I do as a clinical supervisor is professional development. Like I will outright ask that question, like, where do you see your development at now? What are your goals for development? How can I support you in achieving your goals? So for me, I had my own clinical supervisors in the beginning of my career, and getting a lot of feedback from them. I'm the type of person that likes to take initiative. Like if I see something, like I want it, like how do I get this, or how do I advocate for it? I've done that even in my previous jobs. I've had other like managerial position type jobs before. And so I usually where I start at the bottom and then I've worked my way up. So I don't know, maybe it's just like a cultural thing. I don't know. It's like work ethic is just, again, valued super, super high in my culture. And so it's like you don't settle. You just keep going and going and going. And so for me, it was, asking my supervisors, like, how can I get more training? This is like trauma is where it's at for me. That's my passion. That's what I love working with. And so I knew that I wanted to get EMDR trained and SE trained, PIT trained. I wanted all of that. And so I'm also CSAT trained as well. I forgot to mention that, certified sex addiction therapist. And even that one, like I wasn't like, yes, I want to be a CSAT therapist, but there was an opening. When I was at Claudia Black Young Adult Center, the CSATs that were there were leaving. And so there was a gap. And so I felt like, why not? Like I'd be more than happy to like give this a go, like especially with young adults like, struggling with sexual issues. And I've actually have grown to love the work that we do as CSATs. And it's really supported the work that I do at Willow House now too. So I've in terms of like professional development, and specifically as doing that time as a trauma therapist, I got to really play around with the different treatment modalities, and I really got to test some things, like what works for this type of a patient, what wouldn't work for this type of a patient. If it does work, then how can I take it another step further? How can I try something different? How can I think outside of the box with this patient and doing things experientially versus just traditional talk therapy? I have a whiteboard in my office, and so I love using the whiteboard. I love jumping up, and I think very visually myself, and so I don't want to impose that on other people, but I jump up at the board and write my thoughts down as a way for them, the patient, to see how I'm conceptualizing them, or what the story that we might be working on, the trauma that we might be working on. So I'll draw pictures, or I'll draw, I put a table up there and let them know, like, this is what I see here, this is what I'm making up about that. And I think for them, seeing it visually can help them, but it also helps me too to deepen my own clinical skills as well. And of course, like getting support from other therapists. The team that I'm working with, the trauma department that we have at the Meadows, has been great in reaching out for support. If I don't know how to do something, or if I'm like, I'm stuck, this is a patient, this is a story that I have never worked with. And, that's a piece for me where I struggled in the beginning. Like, I wanted to be like, no, I can do everything, but that's just not the case. And I had to really like let those expectations of myself go and just say, I'm a newbie. Like, this is completely new for me. Who am I to think that I can handle all this? Like, that's why we work as a team. And I need to lean into that and take the support that I can. And it's been great in that sense.
You talked earlier about your culture and that work ethic. Tell me more about your culture, Havi, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah. So my culture is from India.
Mm-hmm.
We are Sikhs, Sikh. We're like, my family specifically, we're pretty traditional, but also like with a mix of modernism involved in that too. I have a lot of, elderly family who are very traditional. And then I have a lot of younger family who are more on the modern side of things. So like, I'm like right in that middle gap of all of that. And so, my father has always just been a person that has strived for more and more and more and more, especially he came to America before we did. He came here, his sister came to America. And so my dad followed along, and, we ended up staying in England with my mother for about a year. And then we moved over to America. And so watching my dad go through that whole process, and like starting with literally nothing. We had nothing. We came to this country with nothing. Like, you hear that story, people, immigrating with nothing. we had suitcases. But at the time that my dad, that year that he was here, he'd, gotten us an apartment, he had a job. So he was really building that basic foundation for us, And then we came over, and, I think my dad, just by showing us and by teaching us, ethics of work, and he's had businesses my whole life. And so I've always worked in his business. And again, I think culturally, it's just like, I've just taken on a lot. Like, let me help with this. Let me help with that. I'll take this on. I'll take that on. So I think I just learned from it. I mean, my first job was very young. Like, so we had to. Like, I moved here to a place where we had nothing, and so we need to all support each other.
Right.
I'm 10 years old, 11 years old, and had a concept of what a job is. Not necessarily like getting paid, or like I knew what that meant though. Like, we didn't grow up with a ton of money. And so just at that young age, you have that kind of awareness. You're aware of what money is and what having a job is and how to support your family.
Right. And I wanted to ask that because I know we've talked off camera about, you're doing the year of learning with Resma, our newest senior fellow here at the Meadows. Kind of talk about that experience and going through that process, the year of learning, if you would, Havi.
It's been amazing. Like, it's something that I'm really glad that the Meadows is doing. Getting Resma on board and his message and the work that he's doing, I think has been really great. It's interesting because as a woman of color who's been through my own trauma as a woman of color and just as a woman, period, it's been interesting hearing Resma's teachings and like digging deeper into that, and his clinical techniques as well have been really interesting, and applying it to myself and applying it to the patients that I work with, particularly the women of color that have come through our doors at Willow House, and practicing those skills. I mean, that's just gone a long way, even though they're just like simple skills. He has some really good clinical questions and clinical insights that he's been teaching us, which I've loved, and not only for myself and my own healing and my own like reflection of being a woman of color and what that's done to me, and how I can support other women of color as well, and just women in general. I think it's been really good. I could talk all day about it, but it's yeah.
Well, I want to kind of expand upon that a little bit, because we also talked about, there's been an uptick in women of color seeking treatment, at Willow House. Kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. We're a small program.
Right.
We're 10 beds right now. We will be expanding in the next year to 20 beds. And so I'm hoping with that expansion, we'll be able to see a lot more women of color coming through. But because we're a small unit right now, out of the 10 on a given month, I want to say majority is Caucasian, and we'll get, every once in a while a woman of color coming through, whether they're biracial or, a single race, but really opening up that door with them of like, how has your culture, whether it's racialized trauma, whether they know it or not, like, I don't think that's a term that's used a lot. Racialized trauma is not a term that's used. And so I think once we start to open that door a bit, they begin to realize like, oh, wow, like this has really impacted me. I didn't think about it in that way, and even just what I'm learning in Resma's training, and like he talks a lot about how the body is storing generational trauma and intergenerational trauma. He talks a lot about our ancestors and how like what they had to go through and how it still lives through us, and how our bodies still store all of that. I was telling him about this story during one of our trainings. I won't go into too many details and bore you guys, but like I was literally reading his book as I was at like a tire shop getting my tires changed, and there was a male around, and I just could feel my body tense up. Like I was sitting just like this with my legs crossed, but I could feel my legs tighten just a bit, my ankle tighten, I could just feel it. I didn't know that I was doing it, but I was reading the book and it said, notice your body right now. I'm like, oh, whoa, like it's actually like I feel it happening right now. And a question that Resma asks is it new or is it old? Meaning, is this feeling an old, like generational type of a tension that you're feeling, or is it a new, like in the moment, you're just really tense because you're afraid for your life, or you're concerned for something. But for me, I mean, it was the situation I was in is perfectly normal. I was sitting at a tire shop with the other people around. Nothing to be terrified about. But yet my body had something else to say about it. My body was tense, and it was telling me like either I'm not safe or something is up. So I had to almost like talk to myself and like let my body know like I'm okay, I'm safe, nothing's gonna happen here. And so like even just talking about those experiences that I've had with the patients, I don't think people think about that. I don't think, because maybe it's just me. Maybe I just haven't thought about those things, and having this type of a training has really opened up my eyes to that. And listening to the other people in the training as well talk about their experiences, and I mean, I'm like, yeah, I can relate to all of that, of what others have gone through. And so for me, as a woman of color, and patients coming through our doors, I make it a point to bring it up with them, even if they say, nope, I got nothing. Nope, my life has been great. I'm like, okay. I just wanted to check it out. Like, I just wanted to make sure that this isn't a piece that gets overlooked during your treatment here, because I know that this can be a big piece of people's mental health issues.
Right. And I imagine that that can sometimes be a barrier, trying to understand that, especially if you can't relate. Right, with patients. So I appreciate you sharing that. We've actually spoken with Resma, and when he spoke with me and said, Dominic, you are not defective, right? And I was telling him I could feel that. So I know that experience that you're talking about, when that's the stuff that the body is storing, if you will. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
And so, like we said earlier at the top of the show, you're the clinical director at Willow House. And one of the things you've talked about is domestic violence recovery,
Hmm.
right? I know that's something that's important to you. Kind of talk about that a little bit, if you would.
Yeah, again, I think this is another topic that doesn't get discussed a lot. And at Willow House, I want to be a place where women can bring any type of a women issue in and be able to treat that. And domestic violence is a very real thing, and a lot of people are not acknowledging it, or not understanding what domestic violence is. People think domestic violence is just being hit physically. It could be a lot of different things. It could be financial abuse. It could be the emotional abuse. It could be withholding, it could be withholding whatever it might be. It could be withholding sex, money, withholding them from their own family members. And a lot of people don't look at that as abuse. Maybe a lot of times with domestic violence, the abuser, whether it's male or female, it could be either gender, it's a lot of like understanding what domestic violence is. So we do have like a core lab or a lecture that we teach our patients about what domestic violence is. And that's always one of the lectures where we have to be prepared as a treatment team to be like, all right, guys, like the lecture's going out this week. Let's just be on, let's be hands on deck because it can be very triggering. A lot of women, can get very easily dysregulated relating to the content of like, oh my God, that has happened to me and it's still happening to me. And so, we want to support them by, number one, providing them with the education, validating their experience, and then talking to them a lot about what recovery for them is going to look like. A lot of times that's like having a safety plan, a crisis plan. Like if they feel like their home is not safe, what are you going to do? Like, how can we support you to develop a plan to get out of that situation? And I've heard countless stories of he traps me or she traps me, or I don't know how to escape. The only way out is either by suicide, or it's just suffering through it and appeasing to him or her, and just going along with it until something happens to him or her. And I think a big piece too is like even having some of those thoughts of like, I wish I wasn't with this person, but I don't know how to get out of this. So if something bad happens to them, okay, which I think is a really hard thing for them to talk about. So again, I mean, we obviously treat that with trauma treatment too, EMDR, somatic experiencing. We do a lot of education around, the fight, flight, freeze responses of trauma. A lot of the women coming in are very frozen, especially if they're living in a domestically violent home. They feel that they have to just kind of like just buck up and just hold on. And that's a lot of that freeze response and not being able to really respond in any other way. They feel like they might not be able to defend themselves. They feel like they can't run away. And therefore that leaves them with the freeze response. And so a lot of women are coming in like just they just almost look like they don't know what's going on. Like they're very quiet. They might be very timid. They might be like, not very eager to speak up because they don't know what's going to happen if they do speak up, even if it's with a team that they trust. So I think that's another big piece too, is developing that trust with the patients, like right from the get-go. When they come in, we have to provide an environment that feels safe for them. And I know that my team does a really good job of that. We've had countless women say that this is probably one of the safest places that they've ever been, to really open up about their stories and what their feelings are, what their thoughts are, what their beliefs are. So we take that very seriously as well, being able to support our patients through whatever story they want to tell us, even if it's the wildest thing that you've ever heard. I mean, I've heard some pretty intense stories. We do a lot of, like I said, acute patients. So that's anything ranging from very present domestic violence to sex trafficking, to kidnappings, to, violent rapes. We've seen a lot. I mean, including sexual offending as well. Childhood sexual offending behaviors. We've looked at all of that.
Thank you for listening to this very important discussion with Havi Kang, Clinical Director of Willow House at Meadows Behavioral Healthcare. Come back next week as we discuss narcissistic behavior and gaslighting. For more information on the work Havi does at Willow House, go to willowhouseforwomen.com. Beyond Theory is produced and hosted by me, Dominic Lawson. You can discover more, including videos of some of our conversations, at beyondtheory.com. Finally, thank you for listening, and I hope you join us next time for another episode of Beyond Theory.